Welcome back to the heat. Venezuela extended a partial border shutdown with Colombia this week and sent another 3,000 troops to the area. The dispute has strained relations between the presidents of Venezuela and Colombia. Joining us now from Miami is Alberto Bernal. He's a Colombian economist and head of research at Bulltick Capital Markets. And here with us in Washington, D.C. is Eric Farnsworth. He is the vice president of the Americas Society and Council of the Americas. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Alberto, let me start with you. We just heard from Eva Gollinger there, who told us that this border closure is about criminal activity in the area, about smuggling, about paramilitaries operating in the area, and that there are thousands of Colombians who are in Venezuela, but they are there illegally. They are taking advantage of the huge subsidies that the Venezuelan government pays for goods and reselling those goods in Colombia, as she pointed out, a thousand times the money they paid for it in Venezuela. Do you believe that to be the case as well?
Well, there's a couple of things here that need to be said. Well, first of all, it's obvious that there's smuggling of gasoline from Venezuela to Colombia because of one very simple reason, which is that it costs about 50 cents of a dollar to tank a Ford Explorer in Venezuela. Now, the fact that you have smuggling from Venezuela to Colombia, you know, it would be the same if you had Mexico have a price of gasoline of 50 cents to tank your Ford Explorer, and in Texas it's like $70. Of course, people would be taking advantage of that completely ridiculous pricing schedule that they have for gasoline in Venezuela. So whose problem is it, or who is the main motivator of this contraband that is taking place? Obviously Venezuela, because Venezuela has a completely failed economic system. This system doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and it's obvious that if you have gasoline that cheap in Venezuela, people in Colombia are going to take advantage of that. So that from that point. The second point that I think I understood from Eva is that the reason why Venezuela is in trouble right now, economically speaking, is because of contraband to Colombia. Okay, let's make a very simple test. You know, the border has been closed for 2 weeks, I believe, or 3 weeks. Now, let's ask somebody in Caracas whether or not that person is getting milk in the supermarkets of Caracas. And that person is not getting milk in the supermarkets of Caracas. And the simple reason why that person is not getting milk in the supermarkets of Caracas is because the socialism of the 21st century is a completely failed economic system, which does bring only to the end, and we have seen this many times before. We saw it in the Soviet Union, we saw it in African countries. You control prices, you do ridiculous things against business, and then the only thing that you have is scarcity and hyperinflation. So the economic problems of Venezuela are self-made, have nothing to do with Colombia.
Eric, what do you believe are the main causes of this dispute between Venezuela and Colombia right now? I mean, these two countries have not had the best of relations.
Well, I think that's exactly right, and we've already heard in terms of some of the economic issues that are generated in Venezuela that are causing difficulties. But I think there's a very healthy component of politics here as well. In my view, this is a manufactured dispute. It doesn't have to occur. It certainly doesn't have to occur now because there's been smuggling going on at a rather porous border for many, many years. So the question is, why now? Why should the Maduro government choose now to clamp down and cause real disruption, real hardship for the people of the border, in some cases destroying houses after people have been sent back across the border to Colombia to force them never to come back. And I think we have to look at the politics of the issue, which is to say that the Maduro regime faces an election on December 6th, which all the polls that are credible have them very far behind in opposition right now. And so the government is doing whatever it can to try to bolster its own support, to try to delegitimize the opposition, and it's a very long-standing tradition in Latin America, not just Venezuela, but other countries as well, that when you're in trouble domestically, politically, you pick a fight with your neighbor, or you pick a fight with the United States, or you pick a fight with somebody else to bring out the nationalism in your country and to try to show the flag so that people can rally around. That's precisely what's going on. And let's not forget, it's not just a fight that the Venezuelans are picking with Colombia. They're doing exactly the same thing with their neighbor to the east, Guyana, where they've had a long-standing claim, a border claim on Guyana, which now the Maduro government is re-amplifying because of an oil find off the coast in what the Venezuelans claim are disputed waters. So, you know, what neighbors of Venezuela are safe at this point, or at least not being accused of some terrible deeds? And I think we have to tie that to the elections.
Right. Alberto, the Colombians have reminded us that their economy is doing very well. It's a prosperous economy. Has the Colombian government done enough to create jobs at home so that we don't have thousands of Colombians moving across the border into Venezuela?
Well, here's the interesting thing. The Colombians moved to Venezuela for many years past, like 20, 30 years. A lot it took a lot, we saw a lot of immigration from Colombia to Venezuela. Why? Because Colombia was actually neighboring status of being a failed state. And we all know what happened when President Samper and President Pastrana were in. That was a very difficult time for Colombia. So a lot of people left Colombia. So those people went to Venezuela and they were working there, and most of them are Venezuelan citizens right now. Some of them are illegal, some of them are like it's same thing as in Mexico and the US. Now, what's a fact right now, if you look at the statistics, is that Colombians are no longer moving to Venezuela. It's the contrary. Venezuelans are moving to Colombia. Why? Because Venezuela is having an extremely tough situation. And Colombia, on the contrary, is seeing better times. The economy, they just announced that the economy had grown 3% in the second quarter of the year. Venezuela is going to collapse about 7 to 8%, according to the IMF. We don't see the statistics because Venezuela no longer publishes statistics. I mean, Venezuela hasn't published an inflation statistic in almost a year now. Why is that? Because we have hyperinflation, and the government doesn't want to accept it. They don't deliver growth numbers because obviously the economy is completely collapsing. So it's a completely different story between a prosperous or a country that is trying to do the right thing, which is foster private investment, and the other country which is just the opposite and trying to do everything that you can to completely destroy the basics of economics, which is the private sector.
Eric, what do you make of the regional efforts to broker some kind of truce here, Brazil and Argentina getting involved?
Well, I think we have to let that process play out, but the truth is it's not really a conflict here that needs to be, where peace needs to be brokered. It's a conflict that's generated by one side, and if that particular side wanted to end the conflict, they would just reopen the border. So there's really nothing to mediate here. There's nothing to negotiate. It's all a little bit, it's for show in some ways. Having said that, sure, it's good that other countries in the region, perhaps the Organization of American States, perhaps the government of Uruguay as well, others have offered themselves in terms of good offices. And then there's a negotiation about the size and the shape of the table for the negotiations, right? And, can we really sit down? That's a delaying tactic to get beyond the December 6 elections. So my personal view is it may not amount to a whole lot, but sure, there's solidarity there, and there are fellow Latin American countries that want to see this crisis come to an end.
Alberto, would it be back to business as usual come the election in December, or is there a danger here that these border closures could be permanent in some places?
Well, actually, I fully agree with what Eric just said. To me, this is much more politics, has much more to do with politics than economics. And my sense is that just looking at what this guy Maduro and Mr. Cabello are thinking, probably the best choice is just to elongate this conflict, keep it open, just keep on, just giving very complicated sound bites, etc. Because the goal here, and I fully agree with Eric, is to somehow try to not have the elections. Because the PSUV, which is the ruling party of Venezuela, if there's a fair election, they will be completely wiped out. They're going to lose big time. The people are just, even the hardcore Chavistas are having second thoughts about this. Because in the end, it makes just perfect sense. If you have to wait for 15 hours to get a bottle of milk or to get diapers for your kid, then things change. The system is clearly broken.
And Eric, looking at some of the efforts being made right now to ease the humanitarian situation, President Santos of Colombia is saying that, look, he's prepared to sit down with President Maduro, but the borders have to be opened for humanitarian reasons first. Is that a reasonable request?
Well, I think it is, because the humanitarian crisis can really quite simply be ended just by opening up the border. So again, yes, the Colombians and others have to look at this in terms of how to ease the burden on people that are completely, pawns in this game, really, if you want to put it that way, who have lost, in some cases, their livelihoods, whose families have become split up, who can't conduct their affairs the way they have been able to do so in the past. And the Colombian government has to take on that burden. It's Colombian citizens in many cases, and they're providing stipends, they're trying to provide housing, they're talking about job creation. All of that's very true. But the best way to end this crisis, so-called, is to just open the border. So the fact of the matter is, I think it is a reasonable request. Now, having said that, will a reasonable request be adopted by Caracas? And I think that's something that, as we've been discussing, is very much open to question.